Welcome to Political News and Views with your host, Congressman Ed Towns of Brooklyn, New York, representing the 10th Congressional District, programming with your concerns in mind.
Committee will come to order. Who is watching the backs of the American people to preserve and create jobs?
And now, your host, Congressman Ed Towns.
We have here today with us Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, Chairwoman of the Joint Economic Committee. You have done such a wonderful job on the Credit Card Bill of Rights, which passed the Senate today. Let me begin by congratulating you on a job well done.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. What possessed you to get involved with the credit card situation?
Well, thank you so much, Ed, and I appreciate your help. As you know, it's been a long battle to get here, and you were one of the first co-sponsors of this bill. We held numerous hearings and numerous task force meetings. It passed the House last year with a very strong vote, and this year it passed even stronger in the House, and now today, literally today, it passed the Senate overwhelmingly at 90 for it, 5 against, strong bipartisan vote, reflective of the need of this reform. The reason I got involved is why we got involved in all the issues that confront us. My constituents came to me and said, hey, I need help, give us some relief. It was hard for me to go walk down the street or go to the grocery store, even go to the floor of Congress without hearing a credit card story, and usually a bad one, about some abusive practices. So we started reviewing it and came out with a core bill that struck down the most outrageous practices, such as raising consumers' rates anytime, any reason, retroactively back on the balance. It banned what is called double cycle billing, where they charge interest rate on the balance that has already been paid. It stopped the raising your interest rate because totally unrelated activity, called universal default, where something happens in another area, so they raise your rate. I had one constituent. She was 1 day late on her utility bill, and they doubled her interest rate. How fair is that? Retroactively on her account. And I'm sure you've gotten the same calls saying, I always paid my bills, I never went over my limit, and yet they raised my rate. And this is unfair. So I came out with a bill. Later, the Federal Reserve came out with a rule that mirrored it, and they called these practices unfair, deceptive, and anti-competitive. With the passage of this bill, and we want to get it to the President's desk by Memorial Day, we will strike down these abuses and help our constituents, help the American people. Good Memorial Day gift for the American people.
No doubt about it. I want to say again, I mean, you really stayed with it, you worked it, you got it through the House and you got it through the Senate, and now it's on its way to the President, and I'm certain he's going to sign it.
Absolutely.
So you have to make certain I'm invited to the signing ceremony.
Well, certainly, Chairman, I'll certainly make sure you're there. Another thing that it cracks down on are sort of the tricks and traps that trap consumers. And this one literally trapped me, where they changed the due date. You think you have 21 days to pay, and then they change it to 14. Right. And so then you're late, and then they charge you a late fee, and it gets very expensive. So this says you cannot change the terms and the outlines of your contract. If they say you have 21 days, then they cannot change it. A contract has to be a contract. This levels the playing field between the issuers and the consumers, so that consumers have more tools to better manage their own credit. And what other business in the world can change the contract anytime, any reason? When you buy a carton of milk, by the time you get home, they don't change the amount that it,
no.
You don't change the terms of how much you pay, yet the card companies were able to do whatever they wanted. So this really, I think, is good for the overall economy, definitely good for the consumer, and I think good for the issuer. And Ed, during this time that we have financial crisis, this will give consumers more money to put back into the economy instead of paying unnecessary late fees and interest rates that don't get back into the economy.
You know, you've helped a lot of people by doing this. I mean, I've talked to people who a small business, and of course, who a lot of times borrow money on their credit card to be able to continue to do business. I mean, especially now the banks are not making any loans. And of course, I had two people to tell me that, you know, they just could not understand how all of a sudden you just can change the rates on a credit card, you know, without any notification or anything. Just do it, and that's what you owe. And if you don't pay it, you know what happens. Your credit is bad. I mean, as simple as that. And let me talk about, being you from, of course, New York, and New York is the financial capital of the world. Everybody knows that. AIG. Now that's been a big issue. It's been in the news, and of course we've had several hearings here on AIG. You know, and of course when you talk to people, you know, you talk to some folks, they say, well, AIG should have filed bankruptcy. Others are saying, no, it's been the worst thing in the world to happen. What do you think that they should have done? I mean, now we know we got $180 billion, you know, that the government has put into AIG. So what do you think that should have happened there?
I think that you and I should write a book when you finish all your hearings on AIG, because I think it's a test case in what went wrong and what a government should do to prevent it in the future. AIG was a great American company. It was international. Then they started getting into, basically insurance, they started getting into these risky financial products, highly leveraged. They weren't, and it brought down the entire company. Before the Financial Services Committee, Chairman Bernanke of the Federal Reserve testified that he believed it would have been better if they had been managed, not in bankruptcy, but managed in a reorganization. What we did with the banks, we had the Federal Deposit Insurance Fund, where your deposits were insured, and the FDIC had a role to come in and restructure with troubled banks. We've had many banks that have failed, but they've contained it by coming in and managing the process. We did not have that process for non-bank institutions such as insurance, which was basically AIG's business. We have a bill now that we're working on in financial services that would give the tools to the Fed to manage reorganization of firms that are troubled in an orderly manner. We've had many companies fail, and banks fail actually in this past year. They've been in forced marriages, they've been merged with other organizations, they've been restructured, but they've been there to continue serving the public. And I think that during this financial crisis, one of the main goals has been to keep the financial institutions working. During the Great Depression, many historians believe the big ground down of the economy was when the financial institutions closed, because then you could not conduct commerce. There was no place to get a loan or to pay your bills through or to deposit your check. It just ground commerce to a halt. So through this process, there's been a tremendous effort to keep the financial institutions functioning and out there working. And we've done that very well with FDIC-insured banks, and it's been managed well. We need to be able to do it with the non-bank facilities such as AIG. Both Bernanke and several others, I tell you, who else said that? Green, the former head, in front of your hearing.
Yeah, Hank Greenberg.
He said it would have been better to have been managed in a bankruptcy. So a lot of people have said that. But what will be better with this bill we're working on in financial services, there'll be a structure to reorganize in an orderly way.
Right. Let me just say that, you know, people are saying that AIG is too big to fail. Now, it was in 130 countries. But here again, if we don't watch it, you know, we're going to have the same problem with others, and now that they begin to buy up, and of course the next thing you know, they're going to be too big to fail. I mean, what can we do to sort of contain this? I mean, I don't see any rules or regulations there to sort of stop it. We just sort of like have to bail them out.
Well, I think we have to start looking at who is too big to save. And
I like that one.
And in the AIG deal, they had counterparties, which they paid off. And as you know, it was my letters that forced the information to come public on who the counterparties were. And when you looked at the counterparties and the original bailout of AIG, and I think the bailout was very instructive too. At first, at the beginning of the weekend, they said, oh, we don't need any help. By the end of the weekend, they said they needed $50 million. Then they said they needed $85 million, which we gave them. Then they needed an additional $35 million.